Was an individual that has sat in the same seat that you're sitting in today. Visited our church several times, an individual that I've spoken with on many occasions. Matter of fact, it was not just on my job, it was in my department. I was there, unfortunately, when it happened. But I do know this, that the Lord has spared his life, and he definitely still has purpose for his life. And that God is still a healing God. So we will be praying, continue to pray for Mr. Ronald and his family. Continue to keep him lifted up before the Lord. Again, 2 Timothy chapter number 3, verses 10 and 11. When you have it, say amen.
Amen.
Just to let me say, wait a moment. Amen. Reading from the New American Standard Version of the Bible, just reading 2 verses. The Bible says this. Now, you followed my teaching, conduct, purpose, faith, patience, love, perseverance, persecutions and sufferings, such as happened to me at Antioch, at Iconium, and at Lystra. What persecutions I endured, but out of them all the Lord rescued me. I'll read that again. Now you follow my teaching: conduct, purpose, faith, patience, love, perseverance, persecutions and sufferings, such as happened to me at Antioch, at Iconium, and at Lystra. What persecutions I endured, but out of them all the Lord rescued me. Can you say amen? Amen. So I'm going to use for a sermon subject today is time to tell your story. All right. It's time to tell your story. Time to tell your story. People of God, I must be honest with you, everybody in this place today has a story to tell. All right. You are not in the seat that you are in by accident or happenstance, but on the other hand, you have gone through a great ordeal just to be where you are today. As a matter of fact, if the truth really were told, you probably haven't told your real testimony. I'm sure you told the PG-13 version, but for many of us, for we to tell our real testimony, we would need parental discretion would be advised. Because to be honest with us, many of us have come from circumstances and trials that we don't want to tell the story simply because we like to put it in the back of our memory and forget that we ever went through that experience. But I will tell you that it is often riveting to hear the people of God share their stories, whether it be of salvation or whether it be of healing or deliverance. As an individual in 1896 who was a pastor in this certain area, he began to pastor and preach. He was pastoring and preaching for some 10 years. And the story is told that as he was pastoring and preaching for 10 years, as he was pastoring and preaching, he was preaching a revival. And as he was preaching the revival, his heart became pricked. He became pricked at his own message. And the thing that he recognized is, even though he had been pastoring and preaching for 10 years, he recognized as he preached that he was not saved. Yes, sir. The man that had been preaching for 10 years and had been pastoring for 10 years, he recognized while he said the name Jesus, that the same one that confessed Jesus and preached about Jesus did not confess him and receive him in his heart. And the story is told that while he was preaching his own sermon, that he was saved while he was preaching. People of God, I will tell you that we have some stories to tell. If the truth really were to be told, our stories would horrify some of the people that were sitting on the side of you. And the reason why it would be like that, people of God, is because we've learned how to dress up and to disguise and to hide some of the horror stories that we really had. But I've come to tell you today that it is now time for you to share the story that you had. I want to tell you, people of God, that it is now time for you to share your real testimony. I mean your real testimony, not the one that's stapled together and is fit for the appropriate ears. But if we really were to tell our story, I think that we would erupt in a praise, glory, and honor to God, because you would recognize that you didn't get here by luck, you didn't get here by chance, you got here by the grace, power, and the hand of an almighty God. I believe that there are some people that are here that you can testify with Pastor Herb and say, Reverend, if it had not been for the Lord that was on my side, I don't know where I would be. I have to tell you that you don't have a testimony. This sermon is not going to do anything for you. But for 15 people out here that have gone through some circumstances, you've gone through some trials, you've gone through some situations. Matter of fact, let me tell you that you're going through something right now. You've always sat down and you're going through a circumstance. I've got a good news message for you that God has a plan just specifically tailor-made for you. It makes no difference what you went through, and it makes no difference what you have experienced. God can still use you.
All right.
what we see during the text today, we see that Paul, as he is talking to his protege Timothy, you see that Paul this is the last book that Paul has written, and he is incarcerated, facing imminent execution. He is talking to Timothy, the young pastor at the church at Ephesus, to encourage him. And we've gone through the halfway point of this great book, this personal letter that Paul is writing to Timothy. And he begins to, unfortunately, in verses 1 through 9, he begins to lay a foundation of the times that you and I live in today. He begins to warn Timothy. He says, Timothy, I must warn you that in the last days, difficult times will come. He begins to outline some of the characteristics of the people that not only outline his particular time, but also people that will outline the season that we live in today. I must tell you, when I read this, I don't know if I was reading the Bible or reading the USA Today. The text says that for men will be lovers of themselves. Men will be lovers of money. They will be boastful and arrogant, revilers, and disobedient to parents. They will be ungrateful, unholy, unloving, irreconcilable, malicious gossips, without self-control. They will be brutal and haters of good. They will be treacherous and reckless. I don't mean to kill you, shout, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. But it all comes to a crescendo in verse 5, where it says that they will have a form of godliness, but they will deny the power thereof. Meaning that they look the part and they talk the part and they act the right lingo. But even though you look the part and you smell and you look like you belong to God, that does not mean that you have the power that you possess. It says that they have a form of godliness, but they have denied their power. He begins to outline or lay a foundation for the men and women of that particular time and of the time in the last days that we should be aware of. And he says that he gives a great exhortation. He says in verse 9, but they will make no further progress. Their folly will be exposed and known to all. Let me pause right there and say, you can play church for so long. You can only play with God for only a short season, if at all. But there will come a point in the road where God will uncover and pull the sheet back and uncover the curtain. You ought to be careful when you're singing the song, Lord, shine your light on me. Because when you shine the light on you, you will see not only the good, but there is a possibility that you will see the bad. And so he has to lay a foundation in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 9. But then when he gets to verse 10, he is using 1 through 9 to contrast the great commands that he has in verse 10. He says in verse 10, now you followed my teaching. Or in other words, he says, now you know. Daniel, he says, now Timothy, other people might have heard, but you have first-hand experience because you have chronicled my journey. And he begins to say, first off, you have followed or you have known my teaching. He says, Timothy, you've known the doctrine that I've taught. You've known that I haven't just taught the latest fad, or I've just taught the things that make people shout, or I have taught the things that will pack the house, but I preach Jesus Christ and Him crucified. He said, you have followed, you have known specifically my teaching. He also says you've also learned and you've known about my conduct. It's real interesting that he talks about teaching, but that he also talks about conduct. Because he wanted Timothy to understand that no matter how much doctrine you know, my brother, if you don't have the lifestyle that matches up with the doctrine that you teach, you, my friend, are a hypocrite. And I will tell you in 2017, it breaks my heart to tell you, people of God, that we have people that look the part, they profess the Bible, they profess the word, but they do not have the lifestyle to go along with it. I had someone I used to go to church with, he said, you need to line it up. In other words, if you're going to preach the Bible, your lifestyle should be a reflection of the word that you preach. He said, you have known my teaching. You have also known my conduct. The text also says, you have known my purpose. He says that you've known the purpose that I had. My purpose was to preach the gospel to the Gentiles. And as I look into the room, I see a whole bunch of Gentiles today. Gentiles really is just a non-Jewish person. In other words, you and I were on the outside looking in. But when Jesus comes, bled, died, and he rose, he brought us from the outside and he pulled us on into the inside. Now, for some of you, that really didn't make you I like to say it like this. Many of you, we don't like to remember where we came from, but if you will recall just for a brief moment where you came from, you ought to be glad that Paul brought a gospel to the Gentiles. In other words, he brought the good news to you and I. We really did not deserve to have the gospel brought to us. We deserve to be dead and laid in our graves going straight to hell. But Jesus Christ loved and died, and he said, I don't want him to be on the outside. I want him to be on the inside. So you've known my teaching. You've known my conduct. You've known my purpose. You've also known my faith. He said, now Timothy, I need you to understand that I have not just lived a life and I have not believed. I've walked this life and I walked this life by faith. I believe Paul also says that the just shall live by faith. And I'm going to tell you something, people of God, there's going to come a time in your journey where you're going to have to either believe God or you're going to have to get out of the way. There's going to come a time in your journey where you're going to have to put your faith in an almighty God. Let me break this down. If you put your faith in your money, you're going to break down real quick. If you put your faith in your job, well, Donald Trump's the president, I don't know what's going to happen. If you put your faith in your 401k, you put your faith in your friends, you will be sorely disappointed. But when you put your faith in the rock, when you put your faith in Almighty God, I need to put my faith in someone that's stronger than me. I need to put my faith in someone that can hold me when I go through what I go through. And Paul said, Timothy, I made it this far because I walked by faith. He also said, not only did I have patience, not only did I have faith, but I also had patience. Another word for patience is long suffering. When you know, they used to say, be careful when you ask for patience, because when you ask for patience, you're going to go through something. But then I started recognizing if I ask for patience, or if I don't ask for patience, I'm going to go through something. So I might as well get something out of the deal. But this situation says if you have patience, it is having patience with other people. This I know it's probably going to miss at least half of the people in the building. But do you know that people can get on your last nerve? Have you come out to the bed and say, there's the people in the building that say, Reverend, I know you are talking to me. People can get on your last, the last of the last nerve. And Paul said you got to have patience when dealing with other people. All right. And if you don't have patience dealing with other people, or if you get easily frustrated dealing with other people, consider God dealing with you. If anybody's been patient, it's been the Lord dealing with you. I'm not talking about your neighbor right now. I am talking specifically about you. If this hurts a little bit, our ushers do have band-aids. But I want you to understand that God has been patient with you. Has God ever told you don't go over there and you went over there? Has God ever told you don't touch that, you touched it with both hands? Has God ever told you don't walk over there and you jumped in feet first? But God was faithful, patient, and loving to the point that he said, even though you disobeyed me, I'm going to still have patience with you because I see something in you on the backside that's greater than it was on the front. I'm glad that God has patience with you. And if you are thankful that God is patient with you, I think this is a good praise the Lord moment. And you are glad that the Lord is patient with you. I think you are praise. Everybody needs praise. Maybe because you are a super fan and a super Christian. But for the rest of us that you may not read your Bible all the time, for the people in the building that you mainly say good words for the most part, for the people in here that you think the right things for the most part, God says, I have patience with you. I don't really have patience. Paul said, Timothy, you got to have a lot of love. Not just any type of love. This is an agape love, affectionate love. Not only do you have to have love, but you also have to have perseverance. The Greek word hypomone. You got to have perseverance to be able to endure what you're going to go through. People of God, I need you to understand something. You and I have to have this thing called perseverance. And Mrs. Davis, it means that I'm able to stand under a heavy load. Sometimes the load can get a little bit heavy. So, I'm going to say that again. Sometimes the load can hit a little bit heavy. Have you ever had a heavy load on your shoulders? I'm not talking about a weight, I'm talking about a real burden. God says, I want you to be able to stand underneath the heavy load. The thing that I love about this, Deacon Spears, is that if God says that I can have perseverance, it means that what's on my shoulders, I must be able to bear it. All right? So what you are dealing with right now, it may seem heavy to you, but God says it would be heavy to you if I wasn't on your side. But because I'm on your side, what might crush somebody else will only strengthen you in areas you can. Okay. You ought to be glad for some of the things you've gone through. I'm saying it like this. You ought to be glad for some of the things you've gone through. Because if you didn't go through that, you wouldn't be as strong as you are right now. You wouldn't praise the Lord the way you praise Him right now. Because before you went through that season, you just gave God a little praise because the musicians made you praise, or because they sung you into a praise. But when you go through the furnace of affliction, when you have a weight on your shoulder and you come out on the other side, you learn how to praise God. Nobody's singing. You learn how to praise God. You're not in church. You learn how to praise God with a tear in your eye. You learn how to praise God when you get a bad doctor's report. I need somebody to give the Lord some glory. It doesn't matter what you're going through. You have the ability to stand there and Lord. And Timothy, Paul is telling Timothy that if you're going to be the pastor, if you're going to be the reverend, you're going to have to stand under some heavy loads. So he says in verse 10, he gives these great things that he will have to do, but he doesn't, the sign of a good mentor, Miss Vanessa, sign of a good mentor is that you don't just show me you're good, but you also show me you're bad. If you are being mentored by someone who only shows you the good and the pretty side, you're really not being mentored. That person is really just trying to highlight, you're really just there to boast or boost their ego and boost their pride because they don't want you to know the dark corridors that they had to come out of. But Paul said, I had some good, but I also had some bad. He begins to outline that in verse 11. He said, not only did I go through some good stuff, but I also had to deal with some persecutions. And I also had to deal with some sufferings. And then it begins to get interesting, Deacon Jackson, as he begins to talk about the persecutions and sufferings. He begins to talk about some incidents that happened to him before Timothy got on the scene. It's interesting just made that Paul uses these incidents to highlight some things to Timothy because Paul had gone through some things. But he uses these three incidents at these three various locations that I believe can impact our lives just as it impacted Timothy. He said, these persecutions and sufferings such as happened to me, first at Antioch, then at Iconium, and then at Lystra. Let's kind of break each one down if you don't mind. At Antioch, before Pastor John Adolph was pastor there, this was an actual city in the Bible days. And this place, Antioch, was the first location that Paul went to on his first missionary journey in Acts chapter 13. As a matter of fact, before he went there, he was known as Saul. But by the time he got to around verse 6 and verse 7, the text says that the Lord made a change in his life, and now he was known as Saul previously, but now he was known as Paul. And this individual, Paul, stood up, cleared his throat, and he began to preach his first sermon. Let me pause right there. I remember my first sermon. I remember my first sermon almost 14 years ago. I preached my first sermon, and no, you can't have the tape. It's been banned from the world. But I remember my first sermon. I preached on John chapter 6. I preached the feeding of the 5,000. And I remember how nervous I was for my first sermon, and I remember how intimidated I was to stand behind the holy desk and begin to proclaim the oracles of holy God. I was very intimidated and nervous, but I began to preach. So I can only imagine what Paul was going through. But here's the interesting thing about this, Sister Michelle. The thing about this is that he was preaching to people that he just persecuted. Now, it's one thing to preach to your family and friends, but he was preaching to individuals that he was dragging out of the synagogue. The same abuser walked into the same synagogue and said, Jesus is Lord. Do you know that the Lord can still use you? I think that's a high five on the Please don't make me say the Lord can still use you. But the interesting thing, Brother Jonathan, it goes a little bit deeper than that. Not only was he persecuting individuals in the same synagogue, but he was also from the tribe of Benjamin. And I know you are historians and you don't need me to tell you this. Let me bore you with this fact. The tribe of Benjamin is where the first king came from, King Saul in the Old Testament. But the interesting thing about that is that is the same nation that rejected God. So God says, not only will I use a person that abused my people, but I will also use someone that's not even on the right side of the track. But how many of you know that God can still use you? Some of y'all not saying that. Let's look at the 17. Have you ever thought that why is it that God is using you? Y'all want me to get to the business. Since I got the mic, I might as well do it. God used you and you know that you were the biggest whoremonger around the town. I got my eyes on that. God said I can use you and I know what you used to have in your trunk. God said I can use you and I know who you used to sleep with. God said I can still use you and I know you were a swindler and a hustler. God said I can still use you, but even though you might have been there, once I put my hands on you, do I have these things in the building today? I have no reason for that. Do I have these things in the building today? If you don't mind saying that, I might have been through it, but I'm not there anymore. How five young ladies say, you know I've been ashamed. Hey, I've been ashamed. And when I've been ashamed, it means that you might remember me how I used to be. But the Lord put his hands on me. And when the Lord put his hands on me, there's a change that goes on. Look at somebody and say, I've been changed. Oh, yeah. Text says, Acts chapter 13, verse 48 through 52. Text said that as he began to preach the gospel, that the Jews and the Gentiles began to come together and receive Jesus Christ. But there was a crowd that was there. There was a crowd that got mad because Paul had a crowd. There was a crowd that was there that was mad that Paul had a crowd. When Paul, it's interesting. I'm probably getting in trouble saying I'm gonna say it anyway. It was interesting. It was interesting. When we had five members at Strong Tower, it was interesting. No, people really didn't have a whole lot to say. But once you get 6 members, now people got something to say. When Paul was on the backside, you people came to Christ, well, that's fine. But now they got a huge crowd, and the crowd that you have is bigger than the crowd that I have. When you start judging your success based on the people that you I know I am. It's a dangerous thing when you start elevating yourself because your seats are filling up. So what the people did, the people got angry because he had a crowd. And they started a rumor and a lie on him. You ain't never been in a rumor and a lie, just that they begin to become angry at Paul, and Paul said, you Jews, if you don't want to receive the gospel, I'm turning to the Gentiles. Right. in verse 11. Iconium was 100 miles down the road, and you see the count in Acts chapter 14, verses 1 through 7. By the time he gets to Iconium, Paul, he's got a little reputation. He's got a reputation, and people were saying, wait a minute, now this is the same one that was dragging people out the synagogue, but now he's got the nerve, the audacity, and the unmitigated gall to preach Jesus Christ. Let me pause right there. You know people say that about you. They ain't saying that about me, Remo. Yes, they did. They said they knew you. Now they seeing you at church now, but they knew the real you. They knew the class reunion civic center you. They knew you at the club. And now you got the nerve, the audacity, and the unmitigated gall to confess Jesus Christ. Paul here in Acts chapter 14, verse 1 through 7, he's preaching the gospel so powerfully, my Christ, that the text says that we got to do something about this joke. But instead of getting the crowd, they picked up some stones. And the text says that they began to threaten to stone him, Miss Denise. And Paul said, I'm preaching about the rock, but I don't want a rock on me. It is now time for me to go down the road. And they left Iconium and they went to Lystra. Text says in Acts chapter 14, verses 8 through 20, as Paul, excuse me, allow me to use my sanctified imagination. I'm just kind of preaching in the shower, y'all just so witnesses. Paul is walking down the road. Acts chapter 14, verse 8, if you're in your Bible. He's walking down the road. There's a man there. There's a man that's on the road, and the Bible says that he's crippled. Come on. And the text says that he's been crippled from birth. And as Paul is walking down the road and he sees this man off to the side, Paul offers a word of healing for the man. Now, Paul had been preaching the gospel, but he didn't have signs and wonders like this. But Jesus had told them that at this time you will see signs and wonders as you are moved and filled with the power of the Holy Ghost. Let me pause right there. Don't try signs and wonders if you don't have the power of the Holy Ghost. Let me pause right there. Do you know that there are many people that are trying to do God-like stuff with no ghost, no power, no nothing, and nothing holy? I was a word of healing for the man. The man, Sister Sandra, that was crippled from birth. He was down on the road. He was crippled from birth. And Paul comes, this renegade, that's been changed by God. He offers a word to this particular man, and the man that was once crippled has now got up. And the people of Lystra, Brother Omar, that said, wait a minute, the gods have come down to be with us. They said this, because it was Paul and Barnabas, they said this must be Zeus and his co-worker Hermes. Because when God begins to move, if you don't have the mind of Christ, you'll see a miracle and think you did it. But some people in the building, you pray, you believe God, you are waiting for a job. God gave you a job, and the first person you think was man. You thought it was Zeus. Doctor gave you a bad report. And your body got better, and you thought it was the medicine that you took. Okay, there are some people in the building, you think that your life is being determined by the horoscope that you read in the money papers. You think that the key to your financial prosperity is based on the lotto ticket that you scratch. You think that the key to your destiny, if I can just get these numbers and the lottery ball. But the key is not in the material things. The key is not in the numbers that you scratch. The key is in the God that you serve. And they said, this must be Zeus. And because in Lystra, Brother Henry, they were so full of idolatry that they didn't even have a synagogue. So God sent Paul not to the church, but he sent him into the community. Because if your gospel is only a gospel in the church, then you don't have much of a gospel. But it's when you bring your gospel outside of the four walls into the community. In your Bible, I think that and it got to the point that what happened was that because there was no synagogue there, there was a temple where they worshiped Zeus and Hermes. And they thought that Paul and Barnabas was the God, so they started bringing something, start sacrificing in front of this.
Yes. Right.
Be careful. Be careful. All praise ain't good praise.
Right.
If your life is based on the applause of other people, some of us get drunk with this. Some of us get high with this. You done traded in weed for applause. And you used to like to smoke sweets or joints. 3 for 10 or 5 for 20. You always been preaching. Judge me if you want to. But sometimes you can trade in weed and old E with 40 ounces. MD 2020. Oh Lord, that changed. We don't do that no more. But now you get drunk off of it. And you know you get drunk off applause when they don't call your name, you get attitude. But the true people of God, Rev, you don't have to call my name. I don't have to be out in the front. I don't need any type of fun. I'm doing this because I'm doing this for the Lord. And Paul and Barnabas said, put all that away. Not no false God here. I'm doing this in the name of the Lord Jesus.
That's it.
And very interesting, Gina, in Acts, that account, Acts chapter 14, verse 8 to 20, Paul and Barnabas spoke a word against their God.
Come on.
It's one thing for you to lift up Jesus.
Yeah.
You ain't gonna talk about, you ain't gonna talk about Jesus. That's not good English, but I said it anyway. You ain't gonna talk about it. You know when you get angry, when you get real angry, you can talk with your teeth clenched. Y'all been holding out. Y'all and they got so angry. Last week they got so angry. Now, at Antioch, they stirred up a riot. In Iconium, they threatened to pick up stones. But in Lystra, they picked up stones. And the Bible says, Paul, that they didn't just threaten him this time, but they stoned him and left him for dead. Paul. I ain't get stoned. I've never been stoned before. I've never been stoned before. Paul is like, wait. When I wasn't on God's side, I didn't get this type of treatment. Scott, she's saying, hey man, when I wasn't following Jesus, people were applauding me. They were lifting me up. Now that I'm following Jesus, I'm getting persecuted. And for a carnal person, you would say that there is no benefit in serving a God like that. You would think, if I serve Jesus, it'll keep me from being stoned. But I got some people in the building that you can testify that yes, I love Jesus, but I also went through some things. I love the Lord, but I also went through a storm. But you know the good news of the text, the text says that as Paul was stoned and left for dead, that the apostles got around Paul. And as they stood around him, the book says that Paul leaped up and went back to preaching. Okay, y'all. This man almost died. He was stoned to almost left for dead. And the first thing that he does when the Lord raises him up is going back to preaching. So we know about the Timothy. When it says the persecution and the sufferings that I have endured at Antioch, Iconium, and at Lystra. What persecutions I have endured. But out of them all, the Lord rescued me. You know, I did a Greek study on this. You know what the word all means? The word all means all. He said that out of all that I went through, the Lord is the one that rescued me. I think I got some people in the building that if you look back over your life, you can say, brother, you all right, the Lord has delivered and rescued me. Do I have anybody in the building that can say without the shadow of a doubt that the Lord has rescued me? The doctor left you for dead, but the Lord rescued me. They left me out to dry, but the Lord rescued me. I think it's a high five moment. High five somebody and say, the Lord rescued me. I use an example my son's going to live. I'm going to use this again. So unfortunately, while we were at work, my co-worker, good friend of mine, Mr. Ronald, was working on a piece of pipe. Some type of way, he was engulfed in flame. He was engulfed in flame. Crude oil, hot surface, he's engulfed. He's engulfed. By the time the evacuation horn got there, he was already burned. But the question was, how did they get it done? So what happened was, there was a person that just so happened, heard the screams of my friend Mr. Rock. And what the man did, he could have stood there on the outside. He could have stood there and let my buddy die. The same man that called, he doesn't even know my name. He calls me Mr. Hines. I got my name on my name back. He still calls me Mr. Hines. That's my friend. He could have let him die. Mama, he could have let him die. But what he did was, he went into the fire. He went into the fire. And he began to pull out my friend. And when he pulled out my friend, the flame that was on my friend, Mr. Ronald, got on him too. But he said, I love you enough to not let you die in the flame. And even if I got to get in and shoot you, I can pull you out and they both live. But I got a great story in that. Do you know when you were in the depths of your sin, that the Lord said, I'm not going to let you remain there. I'm going to get you. And he pulled you out. Do I have anybody know that the Lord pulled you out? Then you don't get it. But if you've ever been through hell and the Lord rescued you, if you've ever been at your wit's end and the Lord made a way out of nowhere, if you ever had your back against the wall and the Lord made a way out of nowhere, if you've ever been at a point where I don't know how to make it and the Lord stepped in, I'm glad to know that the Lord rescued you. Timothy, you're going to go through some things, but out of it all, the Lord is going to rescue you. I'm glad to know, Mr. Nice, I'm glad to know that I serve a God who is willing to get in it with me. But I'll go a step further. When I go a step further, I have a God that's going to get in it with me. But the thing that I found out about God is that when I got there, he was already there. When I got there, he was out. This is how awesome your God is. God is so awesome. that when you get in the pit, he's already in the pit. And when you get in the pit that he is already in, he also is the one that will pull you out of the pit at the same time. It's time for you to tell your story. I mean the real story. There's somebody that needs to hear what you've gone through. Amen. I can tell you, and I tell it to you almost every week, I can tell you some of my story. I wish I could tell you that I've been preaching all of my life, but that's not true. I wish I could tell you that I've always tried my best to live a holy and righteous lifestyle, but that's not true. But before you judge me, you haven't either. But the Lord has been faithful to you just as he's been faithful to me. It's not that because I'm pastor and because you are the pew, it does not mean that we need the blood any less. The same blood that I need, the same Bible that I need, is the same that children need. And when it's all said and done, when the story is all written, you ought to tell your story. You ought to tell somebody what you went through. You ought to tell somebody what you've come through. You ought to tell somebody what he delivered you from. You ought to tell somebody how he made a way out of nowhere. You ought to tell somebody. Matter of fact, your homework assignment this week is you find somebody and you tell somebody what you've been through. Because the person that you tell needs to hear what you've been through. And out of it all, the Lord rescued me. I am a rescued man. I'm going to say that again. I am a rescued man. If I was to tell some of the things that I've done, my uncle sitting right there, my aunt sitting right there, they wouldn't even believe it. I know they wouldn't believe it because my mama didn't believe it. And I know my mama didn't believe it because my mother-in-law, my father-in-law didn't believe it. And I know they didn't believe it because I didn't believe it. But through it all, the Lord has been faithful to me more than I've been faithful to him. The Lord has made a way for me when I didn't even want a way to be made. I think it's my assignment to tell my story. But then at the end of the day, I have to understand that what's the purpose of telling your story and his story is not attached to it. Because you just don't want to tell your story and you don't add his story to it. That's all history is. It's just his story. It's not solely my story, but it's his story. He died for that. He come and bled and died. He did the devil for me. When the trumpet blows, the dead in Christ will rise. He doing that. There will be a time that we will be at the great white throne judgment, and the books will be open. He redeemed me. He reconciled me. He sanctified me. And if you are here, and you have not accepted Jesus,